Hi, I'm Colin Crane. I'm the Chief Executive of the Black Country Chamber of Commerce. And welcome to day 4 of the Black Country Business Festival and to this much anticipated webinar on menopause in the workplace, which is part of our ongoing series of workshops around women in leadership. At the Black Country Chamber, we don't just want to work with any businesses, just those that understand their place in the local community and their role as a responsible employer as well. And as such, we've been doing loads of work around inclusivity and looking at how to create inclusive workplaces. And it's worth thinking just very briefly about what that actually means, an inclusive workplace. It's somewhere that the workforce reflects the communities around them. You get flexible working patterns to help people come into work and get around work. There's an understanding of mental health and policies that support this. You have happy, valued and engaged employees. It's cooperative, it's open, it's fair, and it's accountable. And most of all, it's grown up and it spots issues wherever they are and deals with them in a collaborative fashion. And so this session is to educate both men and women on what is now a major workplace issue. And I've got a few stats. Almost 1 million women in the UK have left their jobs as a result of menopausal symptoms, which is just incredible. 4.4 million women aged 50 to 64 are currently in work in the UK, and they are the biggest growing demographic part of the workforce. And I tell you what, we need to do things to increase the amount of brilliant employees in our workplace at the moment. We've all seen the difficulties that employers are having to fill those vacancies. So this type of activity is absolutely important for businesses who need to make theirs as dynamic and as profitable as possible for their own businesses as well. Now, we are incredibly lucky to have 4 brilliant speakers this morning. And the first of which, our first speaker, is the Right Honourable Caroline Nokes MP, who is Chair of the House of Commons and Women Equalities Committee, who now launched an inquiry into menopause. Caroline, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Colin. And I'm just going to set a stopwatch on my phone so that I don't ramble on for too long and bore everybody. But a great introduction to the issue. And Colin spoke of so many things that really resonate with the work that the Women and Equalities Committee is doing at the moment. One of my big passions is how we can promote flexible working, how we can make it easier for everyone, not just women. And I'm always very quick to emphasize that. Flexible working works brilliantly for men as well. And of course, I wouldn't be here today talking to the Black Country business community if I wasn't doing it by Zoom and able to sit here in Westminster and talk to you all in the Black Country about an issue which I have to say I've become incredibly passionate about. And that's not just because of the publicity. And I really take my hat off to some of those inspirational women, the Davina McCalls of this world, the Countess of Wessex, and who would have imagined that we would have had endorsement from the royal family for the work that is going on across the country about the menopause. So there was, oh, and of course, I have to do this, and I do this whenever I talk to the media on this subject. I'll declare my own interest as a 49-year-old woman. And interestingly, GB News, a channel which everybody assures me has a viewership of 0, so I needn't panic about this, but GB News asked me this week to talk through my menopause symptoms with them, which I felt was a little bit too gynecological for midday broadcasting, and I'm not going to terrify you all with them. But I just thought it was really interesting that finally we were having some bravery from the media to talk about the issues around the menopause, the different impacts that it will have on different women. And I think it's absolutely imperative that we're all completely candid about that. It's not going to affect us all in the same way. Of course, it will be different for different people. And of course, it has an impact on men as well. And one of my very close friends is always very quick to emphasize that to me. He said, I see you've been on the television again, banging on about the menopause. Will you please talk about the way that men can support women going through the menopause, whether it is as colleagues, whether it's as employers, or whether it's as partners? Of course, you all have a role to play as well. So back in the summer, the Women and Equalities Select Committee decided that we would launch an inquiry into menopause and the workplace. That is quite specific, and I'm very conscious that a lot of the discussions around the menopause that we see at the moment, and I would like at this point to pay massive tribute to my colleague Caroline Harris, who's bringing forward a private members bill about menopause and HRT. That is quite separate to the work my committee is doing on menopause in the workplace. And we felt very strongly, and you might expect this from a committee dominated by women, that this was an issue that was under talked about. And I think Colin absolutely hit the nail on the head when he was talking about the importance of women in their 40s, 50s and 60s in the workforce. We're the largest growing demographic in employment, but also, and I'm never hesitant to start talking about this, you're now talking about women who were born in the late 50s, the 1960s and the 1970s. We are a very different generation. And I always remember, and I've told you how old I am, so child of the 1970s, that when I was at school, I was really unusual because my mum worked full time. Still in the 1970s, that was quite unusual for a woman with 2 children to be working full time. But nowadays, it's absolutely the norm. And those brilliant women in their late 40s and early 50s who are starting to go through the menopause, starting to experience the sometimes very unpleasant perimenopausal symptoms, they're at the top of their game. They are women in managerial roles. They're women directors of companies. They're women who have experience and have contributed a massive amount, in some instances over several decades, to their employers or to their businesses, to their organisations. We can't afford to lose them. And that's the stark reality. Colin used the stat. So it's 1 million women have been lost to the workplace because of their menopause symptoms. And so my committee decided that we would look into that. We would look at the legislation that was surrounding employment discrimination and investigate whether it was fit for purpose. And I know there are lawyers on this webinar who will love to pick holes in everything that I now say. So from the outset, I am not a lawyer. That disclaimer straight out there. But what my committee is asking is the legislation fit for purpose? And we've received evidence from many, many women of all ages, at all stages in their career, giving us evidence about the discrimination that they have faced because they've asked their employer to be a little bit more flexible whilst they're experiencing menopausal symptoms. And the interesting thing is that when some of them have been forced to take it to a tribunal, they've ended up using disability discrimination legislation. Now, you and I can put our heads in our hands and say, but the menopause isn't a disability. It's a state of being that every single woman is going to go through sooner or later. So we have to be able to address it, and we have to make sure that there are robust structures in place. And there's often a massive discussion, and the media always want to hit me with the difficult questions. So you're calling for a change in legislation, you're calling, their words, not mine, you're calling for the menopause to be made a protected characteristic. Well, the easy answer to that is no, I'm not. I'm asking the question. So I'd actually love to hear that in the chat from those lawyers who are on this webinar. Is the legislation fit for purpose? Do we need something different? Should we make the menopause a protected characteristic in the same way that maternity is? If maternity is a protected characteristic, then, well, maybe should the menopause be a protected characteristic? My honest answer to that is I don't know. I don't know where the evidence is going to take us. And it's going to be, I have to say, probably several months before we come up with any recommendations to government. And at this point in the process, I can't predict what those recommendations will be. But I can tell you some of the things that have really moved me. So whenever we launch an inquiry, we put out a call for evidence. In this instance, we've also done an online survey, and we've asked people to recount what I always say, the good as well as the bad. So I want to hear from those fabulous employers, of which there are many, and I'm just going to cite 2. You are not alone, there are others out there, and I'd love to hear from you too, actually. But Bupa and Tesco, I think, have been real leaders in this, of best practice, of introducing flexible measures that enable and empower women to keep on working whilst they're experiencing those hideous brain fogs, whilst they're going through hot flushes. And the thing that struck me that was so incredibly straightforward and simple was when Kay Burley interviewed me on this. Before we went live, she and I were just chatting, and she said, the one change that I asked my employer to make, in this instance Sky, was to crank up the air conditioning. She said, so every man in this building is wearing a jumper. She said, but I'm comfortable. And of course, that's really straightforward and really simple, isn't it? That we want people to be comfortable in their workplace. Now, that might mean something as simple as a change to the air conditioning, but it might mean that there are other changes that they need. So more flexible working. Now, look, I'm going to be completely candid there. My committee issued a report talking about the gendered economic response to COVID, and it was calling for more flexible working. And I want to see an employment bill come forward from the government that gives people the right to have flexible working from day one. They've made an announcement around that, I think maybe last week, the week before. That's a great step in the right direction. But at the start of the last session of Parliament, we had a Queen's speech, which explicitly said there will be an employment bill forthcoming. It wasn't. The start of this session of Parliament, there was no employment bill mentioned in the Queen's speech. So whilst it might seem boring and techie to some people, I shall keep banging on about an employment bill and hassling ministers to come forward with something that is robust and recognises the really important role that women have in the workforce and actually works to make their lives easier. But the thing I really wanted to focus on that shocked me, and I don't know, I was about to say nothing much shocks me, but I don't think that that's factually correct. Quite a lot still shocks, horrifies and appalls me. The thing that really did shock me, and when you launch an inquiry as a select committee and a call for evidence, you will always get people who contact you with their evidence and they ask that it be kept confidential, or they ask that it be anonymised. Now, keeping evidence confidential is relatively easy, and I'll always say that because you're simply not publishing it. Doesn't mean you're not taking it into account, but you're not publishing it at all. But anonymised evidence is more difficult, but to my mind, more valuable, because I want to publish those stories of women who are too scared to tell their story publicly. Too scared because of the impact they think it will have on their career. Too scared because of the negative response they think they will get from colleagues and from their employers. And in 21st century Britain, to be blunt, that's just not right. That women are scared to tell their stories, that they think it will have negative connotations, that they won't get that promotion, that they will be discriminated against at work if they tell their honest story of how hard it is to go through the menopause. So that has really shocked me, really disappointed me. And I have to say, spurs me on to make sure that the inquiry we do, the eventual recommendations that we make to government will be really, really robust, effective, and will bring about positive change. The final thing I wanted to say, and I'm going to go back to talking about Caroline Harris, who has her private members bill on HRT. Now, Caroline was on the launch webinar that we did last week with the Countess of Wessex for the Menopause Workplace Pledge. It's a brilliant pledge. It's really important. And it is part of that whole picture of how we're all talking about it more. Caroline told this incredibly moving, emotional story about her pink anorak and how she, for years, literally years, lived in a pink anorak with the hood up while she was going through the menopause. And we all laughed and cried at Caroline's tale of her pink anorak. And I was at home at the time, looked at the coat rack outside my back door where my dog walking anorak, which is bright pink, was hanging up. And I looked at that anorak and I thought, you know what? Actually, as a 49-year-old woman, probably going through perimenopause, the one thing that I have to do is go and burn the pink anorak. And that's the message I want to leave with everyone with, is that, you know, we all have to, not the gentlemen, all women will have to go through the menopause. But let's not let ourselves be defined by the pink anorak. We have to talk about it. We have to break down the taboo and the stigma. And we have to be positive about the fact that we are women at the top of our game. We are women with still probably 15 to 20 years career in front of us. So let's not be beaten down by the menopause when by talking about it, we can make everyone's life easier.
Caroline, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. I think I'm determined to set up a support group now called the Pink Anorak. I think that'd be an absolutely fantastic name for it. Just on there's a couple of points in the chat box. I know you can't guess what comes out of the inquiry. I know what a complicated process and how much information you'll be collecting. But one thing that comes through time and time again is and it's in the chat room at the moment is the confusion often around the medical issues around this, and particularly the capacity of GPs and GPs' knowledge. And often women get lost in the world of referrals and misdiagnosis and worry about things that really aren't as serious as they think they are, and they're going down routes or being led towards scans and quite intrusive procedures sometimes that they just don't need. Will it look at GPs' capacity?
No, it won't. It's specifically about workplace. So we're not going to be looking at GP capacity, but there are loads of opportunities headed down the tracks towards us. So Caroline and I have a backbench debate in Parliament. I'm going to get the dates wrong. I think on the 21st of October, where we will be raising issues like that. Caroline's private members bill will be debated on the 28th of October, so a week later. And it's really important that we bring out all of those issues then, but also the women's health strategy. And look, my job as a select committee chair is to scrutinise the government and to hold them to account. This is not something that I shy away from. And what I want to see from the women's health strategy, and I absolutely applaud, seldom that I say things like this, I applaud the government for having the guts to bring that forward. Finally, we have a women's health strategy. Menopause has to be a key part of that. Access to HRT has to be a key part of that, but also information and education. And I do say in defence of hard-pressed GPs who have really struggled through the pandemic, look, menopause symptoms are myriad and complicated. And there are some brilliant people out there. I was talking to one of my, I was about to claim her as a constituent. She's not a constituent, to a fantastic lady who lives in the neighbouring constituency for me, who has a whole website, Clipboard Claire, who gives information to women about the menopause, and she runs a support network where she drives women to their various GP appointments and hospital appointments for sort of weird and wonderful symptoms that nobody has attributed to the menopause. And Claire is really great at just talking to people online and going, you know what, that's a menopausal symptom. Because I go through all sorts of strange things at the moment, which I'm sure are perimenopausal. Or it could just be that I insist on sleeping under a 13.5 tog duvet, 12 months of the year. But it's quite, they're complicated symptoms. So I think there are other opportunities. My committee won't be looking at that, but certainly Parliament is.
And I'm going to set our team a technical challenge here. We've got a very good GP on the call called Nina Wilson, and one of our speakers has dropped out. Nina, if we can we get you to say 10 minutes at the end of the webinar? Is that if that's okay? Clever people in the background will try and sort your permissions out if that's okay. Caroline, just finally before we move on to Deborah, I think one of the things that strikes me is that we've got to somehow have grown-up conversations in workplace, haven't we, between employers and about a whole host of things. These things shouldn't ever feel like a new initiative that's coming along, the sort of things. It's about how you can raise things, have normal conversations, trust your HR, trust your managers. And this feels like a part of just being grown-ups, really, and understanding all of us go through medical issues during our life, and you shouldn't be embarrassed to talk about them. I think that if anything else, how we do that in workplaces is going to be the key to this.
You're not wrong, Colin. I think the worst, and I use the term loosely, the worst piece of evidence that we had was from a female HR director who was struggling to have the conversation within her own workplace. And I just wanted to cry when I read that, because it shows you the scale of the challenge. This was an HR director, big company, relatively local to where I am in Hampshire. And it is still difficult. And I think celebrity endorsement helps. I think Davina McCall has been a real trailblazer. But these are difficult, embarrassing, awkward conversations to have. I do not underestimate that challenge, but we have to have them. And so, sometimes apologies if this, my mother always tells me off, she says, at every point in everything you do, you have to start talking about underwear, darling. It's time to put on your big girl pants and talk about it. And that's how I feel about this whole issue, really strongly. is that if people like me aren't prepared to talk about it, so when GB News wanted to ask me some fairly gory details about my symptoms, I thought, oh, you can't shy away from this, actually, you have to do it. And it is difficult, and it is awkward, and it is embarrassing, but it shouldn't be.
I think there's more cringeworthy stuff on GB News for them to worry about, isn't there? So I think there's Caroline, thank you very much. Are you able to stay to the end of the webinar? Are you okay then?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And it's over to our second speaker, which is Deborah Garlick, who's director and founder of Henpicked and author of Menopause: The Change for Better. Deborah, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Corinne, and thank you, Caroline, for sort of giving us such a great context there of the situation that we're in. What we're really covering on this session today is the why we're talking about menopause now, because obviously menopause has always been around. As long as there've been women on this earth and as long as they've lived long enough, there's been the menopause. But as Caroline says, we're in a very, very different time, and whether you're in the boardroom or on the shop floor, the chances are you are, well, 8 in 10 menopausal women are in work right now. So that is absolutely the demographic case, the thing that we're looking at there. But I won't cover the why. What I'm going to focus on from some of your questions in chat is a little bit about the what about menopause, and also what you can do if you're an employer right now. How can you start off on your menopause campaign? But a little bit about the what around menopause, and thinking about, Caroline mentioned it, around the stigma, the taboo that we've experienced in the UK, actually globally. We've been training employers in the UK and globally for the last 5 years. So I'm talking from experience around what we hear from people. And there is a taboo, there is a stigma. It is difficult. We often say the words, let's talk about menopause, but actually for so many people, that is easier said than done for so many different reasons. It could be that they think it's a personal subject and nothing to do with work. They may feel embarrassed. They may be worried, as Caroline says, that they might not necessarily be offered that project or that promotion that they were hoping for. Or actually, when we do training with line managers, which yesterday I was running one workshop, and quite a few line managers who, by the way, are not born with menopause knowledge and certainly don't acquire it on promotion to line managers, they feel very worried about it. We often ask the question, what's your level of knowledge about menopause and how confident do you feel to talk about it? And the answer is usually very, very low. And actually, I know Lisa's going to cover policies and training very shortly, but you know, in an hour and a half, you can take them to feeling like yesterday's was 100% saying, I've either got good or very good knowledge about menopause and feeling comfortable to talk about it. So that whole let's talk about menopause, there has to be an acknowledgement that for some people, the word's going to feel very strange in their mouths, and they're going to have to get used to it. And for some of them, it will take a certain amount of bravery to open up that conversation, but we do have to. So when we look at menopause and how it affects somebody in the workplace, and for that matter, the myths versus the facts, if we look at ages, stages, symptoms, and solutions, just the 4 things, these are the things that have been rife with myths. Ages, the menopause age on average in the UK is 51. It's usually between the ages of 45 and 55, but many of us think of it as much older. The stages of menopause, this is a transition which happens over many years. And so when we say the average age is 51, that's not the whole story. The transition, the start of the transition, known as the perimenopause, starts years before that. And actually, it's the most mysterious stage of them all, because this is the stage when the body might start to change, hormones start to change. We may start to experience symptoms, but you may not have had any hot flushes. Your periods might not change. You may be completely unaware of the perimenopause, so you don't know necessarily that the symptoms that you're experiencing are as a result of hormonal change. So our experience of training colleagues in the workplace, There are so many that come to the training sessions thinking they're coming because menopause might be on the horizon for me. And as soon as they see the symptoms, that's when their penny drops that actually it's not on the horizon. I recognise some of those symptoms. I'm already experiencing them. And there are those that think menopause is just something that they've got to grit the teeth and get through, not appreciating how much support is available or how to tap into that support or get the best out of their GP appointment. Or there are also those who have also tapped in, and this came up in chat a few minutes ago, they've been to the GP and didn't necessarily get what they were expected. And maybe the message that they got was, it's one of those times of your life, see how you get on. Well, you wouldn't do that with any other condition, would you? And certainly when people are struggling in the workplace, it's absolutely essential. Now, I would say, if I think of the training sessions I was running yesterday, there were some people that were putting in the chat that their GP had been an absolute hero during this time and had recognised the symptoms and had given them all the support. But I do also recognise that there's so much more to do in terms of training GPs. But what I would say, when people have had training on menopause, they can change the conversation with the GP. And we do a lot of coaching when we're doing our training to help those that are experiencing symptoms have a better conversation with their GP. So it's much more around, they've done the preparation, recognise these are the symptoms they're experiencing. They've done their reading up. They know what they might want to try, whether that's the medical approach, the HRT, or changes in their lifestyle. So the conversation is much more empowered and gets a very, very different result. So that level of knowledge, that education can really help somebody, set somebody up to have a much better conversation and therefore a better outcome. And the symptoms, again, we all recognise hot flushes, but actually the TUC survey in 2018 showed that the symptoms that women said affect them most in the workplace wasn't necessarily the hot flushes or the physical symptoms. We heard a lot about the psychological symptoms. People weren't expecting brain fog. They weren't expecting, we hear comments like, I thought I had early onset dementia, or anxiety levels increasing. And the verbatims from that survey were very much around, I know what to do about a hot flush, I sit near a source of ventilation, but I wasn't expecting menopause to chip away at my confidence by making me feel like I'm not capable in my role at work. So the symptoms are, very wide ranging. 3 in 4 of us experience symptoms, and that can be anywhere in that range to, I don't know, those that say, I get a hot flush now and then, but it's okay, I can deal with it, through to the 1 in 4 who can feel completely polaxed during this time. Now, I would say for employers, and I'm going to give employers a shout out here, that, this isn't a problem of lack of knowledge in the workplace. Well, it is really, but it's actually society-wide that this is an issue. But employers are really stepping up to the challenge and recognising that it's good for their colleagues and it's good for them to do menopause campaigns. So absolutely changing the dynamics of menopause knowledge and support. And of course, it's not just in the workplace when that happens, because that knowledge then goes home. And that's part of changing the culture in the whole of the UK. So that's a little bit about the what, how does it affect people? And I'm sure we'll have more of a conversation around menopause later, and certainly the chat conversation around GPs. I know Nina's going to be joining us shortly to talk about that. But I now want to sort of focus on, if you're an employer, what can you do to start your campaign in your organisation? Because actually, and Caroline mentioned it, our experience is it's probably more straightforward than you think it is. It's often simple changes that can make a huge difference, and it's just a matter of getting started. So after this session, we are going to send you a checklist, which is the 6 fundamental areas of focus. And I'll talk you through those very, very briefly. because every organisation is different. We all have different things in place, different policies, different cultures, different leadership styles. So there really isn't one size fits all. But there are key areas of focus that every organisation can look at. And the first one is making it clear how your organisation is supporting menopause in the workplace, and making it clear for many organisations that will be launching a menopause policy or a menopause guidance document. And I know Lisa's going to talk through that shortly. And for many organisations, it doesn't really matter what they call it, whether it's a guidance document or a policy, it's not law yet, but it doesn't matter what they call it. What's important is that that approach is written down and it's easily accessible and it's well communicated. I often say, think about the colleague that's experiencing menopause symptoms and is trying to build up courage to have a conversation with her line manager. If they can go to the intranet and they can easily find how you're supportive, then that will be hugely reassuring to them, and particularly if it says what the support is that's available in the organisation. Or for that matter, a line manager that gets a meeting going in his diary saying, or her diary saying, I'd like to talk to you about my menopause. You know, if they can find that information and know what the organisation's approach is, they're much more likely to have a good supportive conversation. So that's number one. Number two is creating the culture where it's easy to talk about menopause. And if somebody is struggling, they feel more comfortable opening that conversation with their line manager or maybe even with their colleagues. Now, it has previously been a taboo, but our experience of this, and I'm going to quote Evelyn Dickey, who's the independent panel member for Menopause Friendly. She launched the very first campaign in the UK back in 2017. And I know when we had the first event there, she said she felt an organisational sigh of relief, like everybody was waiting to have this conversation. And she was surprised who joined in that, both men and women joined in that conversation. So getting your communications going, getting your senior stakeholders to share their story and say, this is important to me because, all help open up that conversation. And there's never been a better time. We are currently in Menopause Awareness Month, and I guarantee we are going to see lots more exciting things happen throughout October. So 18th of October, World Menopause Day, a really good time to open up the conversation in your organisation and keep it going. I mentioned earlier that sometimes for some people, talking about menopause doesn't come naturally, but I can guarantee you it does get easier with practice. So that's number two, talking about menopause. Number three is training people on menopause. I've mentioned it briefly, but we often recommend making sure you're getting your support functions, your HR people, occupational health trained up, because they're the people that line managers are going to go to if they get stuck on this. Make sure you train your line managers. And generally when we train line managers, we look at why it's important, some menopause facts, what reasonable adjustments, what workplace adjustments will help an individual. And these are very often simple things, and how to talk about menopause, how to open up the conversation. We do sometimes have line managers who feel reticent to open up the conversation, but actually once they start to appreciate this might be like any other health condition, you know, opening it up with open questions, certainly not saying to somebody, did you think you could be menopausal, or I think you might be menopausal. They're not there to sort of make a diagnosis. They're just there to help and support their colleagues be at their best. So some run-throughs on how good conversations can work. And I won't go through them all, but the other ones that are on this checklist are the more practical things. Having a look at your facilities. What's the temperature like in your organisation? Can you work from home? What's your policies like around there? And I will shout out that some organisations, and I'm going to mention HSBC UK, who were the first accredited menopause friendly organisation in the UK. They actually made their uniforms of breathable fabric and change the cut as part of their campaign. And, you know, colleagues really appreciated it. Or I know I saw recently Sainsbury's new blouse for colleagues on the shop floor, and that was made of breathable fabric, and it was communicated with a Twitter feed with a colleague wearing it, and she said, "You're okay now to put the heating on, I'm fine," which was fantastic to see that. So those things are making a huge difference to people's lives every day. And I would say the sooner all employers, I'd like to get to a place where being menopause friendly as an employer is the norm within the UK and globally. And, you know, the trajectory of travel that we've got at the moment, the momentum, fingers crossed we get there sooner or late, as soon as possible. And just one little shout out. The first thing that you can do, and you can do this right now, and you can do this for free, is to sign up to the Menopause Workplace Pledge. We'll put a link in the chat box so you can go straight onto there. Now that's from the charity, the Wellbeing of Women charity, that did the first research back in 2016 around how many people were leaving leaving their organisations. It is free, but donations are always welcome. We are trying to save up for some more vital menopause research. And I say vital menopause research, Wellbeing of Women is Henpicked Menopause in the Workplace as charity. So we do want to help them raise funds. So that's one thing that everybody can do today, Corinne. Put it on your priority list and sign up for the Menopause Workplace Pledge. Might leave it there, thank you.
Thank you, mate. And we will be signing that. That's our pledge today. So just a couple of points, really. In the chat, there's lots of people are asking about, are there places, are there chat rooms, are there support groups, places that people can go to talk about these symptoms? Do you know of any really good ones where
yes.
people can go?
And actually, one of the things that Menopause Friendly Membership is an organisation that helps employers through this journey. So whether you're starting from scratch and want to understand what you can do, and you can join in with other employers to understand what they're doing. But one of the workshops, or one of the things that we're finding very useful in employers, are support groups within organisations. It really helps people understand they're not on their own. It's not about sort of offering advice to them around, have you tried this HRT or that HRT? It's really around camaraderie and helping people know that they're not on their own, and actually enabling the conversation to be so much easier. So often in the workplaces, whether they're virtual groups like Yammer, or I know the session I was on earlier today, Astor Group have got one called the Sofa Session. They were with us last week, Caroline, on the Duchess of Wessex's round table. Theirs is called the Sofa Session. Or Burness Paul have got a support group within their organisation called Club Tropic. So people are getting very creative with all of this, but actually those support groups within organisations are fabulous for that.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And I was just struck by the thought, actually, that the psychological symptoms of the menopause, if you don't know quite what's happening, must be absolutely terrifying. It's easy, like you say, about the flushes and but actually when you start with the brain fogs, the confusion, the worry that must cause, and unless you are well read and you understand what's going on, it must be really, really awful for people.
Absolutely, and that's why I say perimenopause is the mysterious part of the transition, because you may not realize what you're experiencing. But you know, the training and these campaigns generally, and we usually work on inspire, engage and empower. And once people do know what's going on and they do know what to do about it, they've got the signposting, you know, it can be literally life-changing. I know that makes me sound a little bit get my soapbox out, but it's literally empowering when they know what they can do about it and the difference it can make to their lives. And you know, as a menopausal woman, like Caroline was saying, I'm 12 years into mine, but I sometimes still get brain fog, and mine's a pea super today. Sometimes it's just nice to be able to say, you know, if I forget my words, it's just a little bit of brain fog and I've got a pea super, and not feel like you're being judged for it. You know, I'm still me, I still hopefully do a great job, but just sometimes I lose the name for something. So, you know, it's empowering for people when they've had the training and they do, and it enables them to get the support they really need.
Deborah, thank you very, very much for that. Lisa, we're going to go straight over to you, okay, if that's okay. Lisa Kemp is Associate Director for Employment and HR at Thursfields Solicitors, and you're going to give us a bit of a legal perspective of businesses, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Corinne. Some powerful words so far and some shocking statistics. And I would agree with all of the speakers so far that this really is about educating stakeholders about, you know, why this really is a business issue. I mean, if they're not buying into this because of the human angle, then, you know, they need to think about the cost that it's having and the detrimental effect that not supporting women has on their bottom line. Corinne, you mentioned almost a million women leaving the workplace, replacing them, and Caroline said these are women at the top of their game.
Oh, Lisa, I'm sorry to stop you in flow. We're having a problem picking you up, your voice up. Sorry.
That's okay. I'm going to move a little closer to the speaker. It might mean that you're getting my big face on the screen, but is that better, okay, Corinne?
You're perfect, my friend. Thank you.
Fab. Look, for me, menopause as a topic is a topic that permeates into lots of different areas of HR and employment law. To start with, you know, absence management, performance and conduct processes. I'm glad I followed on from Deborah because she mentioned brain fog. I mean, imagine how much more empowered our line managers would be with the right training and standing in handling performance and conduct issues. Imagine, Deborah, if you were hauled through, you know, a disciplinary meeting because you've forgotten to do something or part of your job, you know. So I think the solution really here is focusing on training and making sure our line managers are properly supported in understanding how to handle this. I mean, another important legal area is menopause discrimination. They're failing to manage and support women in the workplace gives rise to the risk of resignations. I mean, Corinne, out of those, you know, nearly 1 million women, how many of them might be able to sue for unfair constructive dismissal? Probably a lot of them. And all the risks of, you know, disability, age or sex discrimination complaints as well. Now, the sad reality is that People Management recently reported that last year there were 60 employment tribunal cases. That's up from 6 the previous year. So we are talking really, really small number. Now, my take on that is that this is nothing to do with the fact that these women do not have legitimate claims. I'm very sure that they do. But it is most likely the fact that, you know, there is this stigma around it, as we've all been discussing. But businesses do need to wake up because the direction of travel is that, you know, that claims are on the rise. You know, pregnancy and maternity discrimination claims are very small as well, but it doesn't mean that is not a real workplace matter, a workplace issue. Now, thinking about menopause discrimination, I've used that as an expression, but perhaps wrongly, because, of course, as Caroline's mentioned, there is no standalone protection at the moment. Menopause is not a protected characteristic that's recognised in the Equality Act. However, women, and we're all using the language women, but you might pause here to just remember that non-binary employees and trans men could also be discriminated against. But for the purposes of today, I will use the word women, but of course the category is much broader than that. But women are afforded protection by current equality legislation. Now, under the existing framework, it's lawful to discriminate a woman in the workplace based on their age, their sex, gender, or disabilities Caroline's mentioned. I think those are the protected characteristics that apply when we're looking at menopausal symptoms. If we just spend a moment, if I may, just unpicking that, the language in the Equality Act is very, very specific, but broadly, discrimination arises when a woman is subjected to unfavourable or less favourable, or they're disadvantaged in some way because of their age, because of their sex or disability. So a couple of examples, which we've talked about already, but a woman who is disciplined or sent through a performance management process for forgetting something, you know, is being unfavourably treated and has therefore been discriminated against. The requirement to wear certain uniforms. I mean, thinking about my profession, at a tribunal, I don't personally wear a robe, but in the judiciary, wearing a robe, those heavy robes and the wigs, that is a requirement. But having a provision, practice, or requirement like that indirectly affects a group of workers, in this case women, that amounts to indirect disability discrimination. Moving on from that, harassment is another sort of key area where cases are being brought. Harassment, if I've just got some notes here to remind myself, harassment is when there is unwanted behaviour relating to, in this case, age, sex, or disability, which has the purpose or the effect of violating dignity or creating an intimidating, hostile, or degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment for people at work. And sometimes menopausal women are a butt of jokes, but if they're in a workplace where they are left feeling that their dignity is being violated or they're humiliated, then they are experiencing workplace harassment. Now, what I'm not necessarily suggesting is that women need to be raising grievances about it, but of course that is their legitimate right to do so. But maybe we should be calling out that behaviour, and if it's happening, then looking to raise that in the workplace, calling it out, and if it persists, then it does become a conduct, a disciplinary matter. And being brave enough to call it out and have those conversations. Deborah mentioned some of the symptoms, and she used the word, and I've written it down here, she definitely referred to there being a range of symptoms, and that's absolutely true. And symptoms can be such that it renders an individual disabled for the purposes of employment law. So I don't mean it in the sense of getting a blue badge, but I mean for meeting the definition in the Equality Act and being afforded protection. Now, a disability for the purposes of employment legislation, or equality legislation rather, is that the individual has a physical or mental impairment. It has a substantial and long-term adverse effect on the way that individual goes about their day-to-day. So if we think about that, then some menopausal women may not have symptoms that meet that definition. Other women may well have symptoms that readily meet that definition. And as Caroline said, that one of the things that's being looked into by the committee is whether the current framework is adequate. Because not every woman is going to be able to prove that her symptoms are such that she's disabled and then go on to succeed in bringing a claim. Now, I heard on Monday, albeit I can't remember where, to give credit to the statistic, but out of 10 disability discrimination cases brought regarding menopausal claimants, only 3 of those were successful. So it may be that actually disability discrimination is not the right lens in which to look at this and bring a claim, but perhaps boxing this as age or sex discrimination may be more appropriate. But if the definition's met, then those individuals are afforded protection in the same way. So they mustn't be subjected to any unfavourable treatment or subjected to any sort of detriments of any kind. But the legislation with regards to disability discrimination goes one step further, and it creates a positive obligation on employers to make reasonable adjustments. And Deborah, helpfully mentioned some of those. Now, these adjustments don't have to be particularly costly. It can be as much as making sure that there is core water supply in the office, or water in the meeting rooms, or that the air conditioning is cranked up, or that their workstations are moved closer to open windows, or relaxing dress codes. These adjustments don't have to be significant. They don't have to be hugely costly. They have to be reasonable. It might be worth adding at this point, while we've been talking about equality legislation, but employers have a duty to ensure the health, safety, and well-being of their staff. And that includes assessing and addressing risks. Now, how many employers are undertaking risk assessments with their menopausal colleagues in mind? Now, I know employers are doing it when it comes to assessing risk for their pregnant workers. I know that because I've just had a baby myself, and my workplace undertook several risk assessments for me. And there's legislation for that. Employers are routinely doing it. But how many of them are doing it with their menopausal colleagues in mind? So what I'd like to end on for everybody is, where do we go from here? Well, there are some medical professionals on the line. There may be some hairdressers, I don't know. But what we can all do is, as well as signposting our colleagues, our friends, our loved ones to their GP to get support, it may be that we could be also some signposting them to an employment lawyer, to HR professionals, so that individuals understand what their rights are, and enforce them if necessary as well. I would like very much to end on the fact that employers have a real opportunity here to create a more supportive working environment and culture. And my recommendation is to have a look at existing policies that are in place and seeing whether they can be brushed up on at all. Thinking about introducing a specific menopause at workplace policy. And before we went live on this call, we talked, didn't we, about some of us, already looking at getting specific menopause policies in place. And indeed, we're working with clients like Deborah to get them in place. And it shows a real commitment, doesn't it, to our staff that this is important to us. Now, underpinning that with training as well, and Deborah and I spoke about that, so I don't think I need to say any more. But raising awareness and breaking taboo, we can do that quite subtly. We don't have to necessarily have, hardcore militant menopause training mandated for all. We can sneak it into health and wellbeing seminar. We can have a short little session. We can do it light touch for those cultures and businesses that aren't quite ready to be smacked in the face with it. And we can promote support from it within as well. We can, we can get occupational health involved. We can have, packs all ready to go to hand to our colleagues. We can have some some memos and posters up up by the water cooler as well. How apt, too, that there are lots of things that we can do. There's good support out there. With Thursfields Solicitors, we've got Deborah. There's all sorts of support out there. Occupational health specialists, we've got a medical specialist who hopefully will be joining us too. There's a lot that we can absolutely do. And I think, Corinne, if it's all right with you, I'd very much like to end there and, save some time to welcome some questions for us all.
Sorry, Lisa, thank you very much for that. Just very quickly, do you think there is a need for fresh legislation, or do you think existing legislation is enough to cover this in the workplace?
Well, that's very interesting. And I'm yet to be convinced that introducing a new protected characteristic, menopause, is going to cut it. That's not saying I can't be convinced, but I'm yet to be convinced. As I've said, I'm not sure that disability is the right box always to fit it into, but almost certainly perhaps looking at this as an age and a sex issue. Yeah, for the moment, I feel that the framework is there. Whether what we need is for it to be a legal obligation for policies to be introduced, perhaps, or some statutory guidance. I mean, there may well be some guidance. Well, in fact, I know that ACAS produced guidance on this, but it's non-binding. It's not statutory. So maybe that perhaps is the route to go down. But I think we need to see what the response to the inquiry and the evidence that Caroline referred to earlier says, really, before we can take it forwards. But yeah, I'm yet to be convinced that we need a new protected characteristic here.
Thank you very much, Lisa. That's really appreciated, and we'll come back to some of these at the end, I think. Just sort of a final impromptu speaker is Nina. Nina, GPs are getting a bit of a slating earlier on, and that's obviously not the case. Like Caroline and Deborah both said, there's absolutely some brilliant work being done. Could you want to say a little bit about your work and about the potential to educate those GPs who aren't quite as switched on as you?
Sure, and fortunately, perhaps I wasn't party to the discussions earlier, so yeah, so I didn't hear those things. But let me talk a bit about the role of the GP and the experience that I've had in treating menopause. And to start with, I did just want to echo what's been said already, in that these are women at the top of their game. And I've worked in senior leadership roles in NHS England, and been surrounded by women, as well as the patients I'm seeing in my clinic, who are really impacted by menopause. And it's kept very quiet when they're really in very important roles and they've got so much to offer. One of the things that's really inspired me to get involved was a conversation with a female CEO, first CEO role around 44. Everything was okay till about 48, and then not sleeping, brain fog, sweats, and so on. And she would go into meetings. Often she might be the only woman there, and she's battling this challenge that it's not happening to her male colleagues. And I think it's really important to recognise that this is another challenge that's happening to women. It's affecting men, obviously, from the knock-on effects, but it's not happening as part of their normal life. And I think we get through the pregnancy and the maternity parts and all the kind of work that's been done to improve equality around that. And now there's this other thing. And we need to support women here to level the playing field so that we can continue to get the amazing contribution that they can bring. And that's what really, really inspires me to do this work. I recognise what Deborah's been saying about the fact that younger women in the early stages, they don't really engage with the idea of menopause. It's something that happens to older women. And so what I tend to see in the clinic is women who've been putting up with this for a long time. It comes on, little symptom appears, and then it might get worse. New symptoms add over time, and it can be quite confusing. Is it stress? Is it something else? And these things build up. And actually, by the time I see women, and this is something I want to change, actually they're really quite overwhelmed. They've been putting up with these symptoms for years. 4 years is quite a common time that people will tell me before they've come to seek help. And I think we need to think about what damage, if you like, might have been done in that time to their careers, their relationships, their lives. And so I really think it's important that we educate people about the perimenopause, and so they can recognise this and are empowered to seek help early. I think every woman deserves excellent care around midlife and around the menopause. Whether they're getting symptoms or not, this is a time to review their health, because going through those hormonal changes the lipids in our blood. So cholesterol often rises, and it can increase our chances of heart attacks and blood vessel disease. Also bone density, we start to lose bone density. So it's an opportunity to actually review the whole woman's health for now, but also the future. And so it's really, really important not to put this off. These symptoms are often really, really treatable. And I've been seeing women this morning who may be new presentations or people who I've started treatment for. And I find it immensely satisfying, because the transformation to someone's life, I can't overestimate that. I can't promote that enough, is that those psychological symptoms, the not sleeping, the sweats, it can all just be so debilitating. And when you see somebody who is doing well on treatment, those things, they kind of melt away. And people say that they sort of return to themselves, and there are few things that are that treatable, actually. So it makes for extremely satisfying work. And I would promote that to other GPs. So what about the gaps? There are clearly gaps, and how can we address those? I think, so when I was training, there wasn't a lot that it was considered that you could do about the menopause. And I think we need to be clear, there's been a lot of misinformation of medical professionals. For example, when I was training, it was considered That was the time when everybody was being taken off HRT. It was considered very, very dangerous because of the way the media partly had handled the research and the kind of conclusions that were drawn from the research that we're now reviewing and seeing that what we were told was not actually the case. And for the majority of women, treatment such as HRT is actually extremely safe and will bring them many more benefits than it will risks. So it was, for that reason, actually, it was a big gap in people's awareness and people's training, because it was considered that there wasn't very much that you can do. And it's taking a while for that to change. Another example of that is if you look at the patient information leaflets for transdermal HRT, so that's the kind that you would rub on the skin, or vaginal HRT for vaginal symptoms, it's only recently that they have been changed to remove the warning that these can cause clots, clots in the blood, that is. And so people would read this and get the wrong information that actually this had risks associated with it that it didn't. And it's taken a long time to change that. And I've had reports of patients who've been given things by their doctor, and then they read the patient information leaflet and it scares them. But actually, it's not true. Those things don't apply to them. So there's some real gaps actually in the medical establishment's approach to the menopause. And I think in some ways that reflects an approach to women's health in general. You know, I've recently been reading the book Invisible Women by Caroline Nokes, and it talks about the sort of data bias and how a lot of medical research is done on men, and often those things tend to get more funding than women's health research does. So there's a huge opportunity to increase women's health research, a huge opportunity to clarify accurate messages for health professionals. What can we do? Well, I think it really helps if there is a specialist or somebody with an interest in menopause in each practice. It doesn't have to be necessarily every doctor, but that person, that practices are small communities, that person can then inform everybody else in their practice, and women can potentially be diverted to the person with the special interest if they want to talk about menopause or if they're showing signs. So I think we can do that chain reaction whereby you can have some people educating others, and that will help. I'm now part of a network of extremely enthusiastic GPs who do specialise in this. And so there is actually a workforce ready to mobilise on this topic. And one of the challenges we have is what we're addressing today, and that's raising the profile, because it's not well funded. Menopause clinics secondary care menopause clinics are quite few and far between, tends to get mixed into general gynecology, but it's not something that often receives specific funding. And people who have private insurance may find that menopause is not covered, or is covered in just a small amount, or they have to pay more money to get that care. So I've talked about a lot of things there, but I hope that just kind of gives you some insight as to why things might be as they are, what we can do to make it better. It's certainly something that that we want to make better. And it's really important from a public health standpoint, a general health standpoint, as well as a specific menopause standpoint, to get the right care for women at this time of their lives.
Nina, that's incredibly helpful. Thank you so much for stepping in and doing that. That's absolutely brilliant. And just sort of to emphasise that book by Caroline Nokes, The Invisible Women, is shocking, actually, and it certainly makes you view medicine in a very different way, and the discrimination that's taken place for decades, I think. So it's well worth a read for anyone on the call. Nina, if people don't quite think that their GP has got the grasp on the subject that they should have, what's their best route?
Yeah, so good care, I think, is always a partnership. And I've been really interested as to why women don't come forward, and I've interviewed quite a few women about this, and I don't know, we may well not have time to go into that now, and I know a lot of women feel worried that they might be dismissed. The time frame for a consultation is quite short, and if you've had symptoms for years, and it takes a while to unpick that, and that can just be quite intimidating, and they're often it's a really busy time of life. Women tend to put themselves last at this time of life and need to be encouraged to kind of step forward with this. But I think, so if they're not being heard in the way that they would want to, things that we can do to help, I think, is empowering women. The sort of work that Deborah's doing, the way that Caroline is talking about it, if women feel confident about stepping forward with this, then they're more likely to pursue it. And, you know, I want to get to the point where it isn't that they have to try, you know, more than once or twice, but perhaps asking if there is a specific person in the practice who has an interest in menopause or women's health, because there are a lot of female GPs, a lot of them do study these kinds of topics and are interested. So there usually will be somebody, and perhaps going with symptoms that are available to screen for online. So you can Google symptom checkers or symptom scales for the menopause, and women can spend a bit of time in advance looking at their symptoms, and that can help save time, if you like, when they go to what might be quite a pressured consultation. I mean, I find that I do often overrun on my consultations, because to go through all the symptoms and then to talk through all the options takes me much more like half an hour than it does 10 to 15 minutes to do that properly. So you can actually be really efficient if you can take that with you. And there's increasing amounts of good information out there for women, that they can even think about the sorts of treatments that they might like to try. And it's good, obviously, to discuss that with their health professional. But I'm sure we've got some resources coming on in the chat, but Louise Newson's Balance app has been mentioned, and her website has good leaflets on it. Women's Health Concern, British Menopause Society, and open the conversation with your peers. Open the conversation with your peers. There's lots of people often do talk to their friends and find that they're having the same sorts of things. So things that you can do to empower yourself and get that message across really clearly. Women tell me they often might, you know, minimize the symptoms. They think, oh, I'm not ill, so should I really, or should I just put up with it? You know, no, this is important. Present that as well as you can, and just keep going.
Nina, thank you again. Thank you so much for that. That's been absolutely brilliant. We've got a few minutes left. Do any have any questions for any of the speakers? Please put it in the chat box, and we'll try and turn your mic off, and you can speak. We'll also try and think of a technical way of copying all the text and sending out to attendees, because there's some great debates going on in the chat box. So, any questions for any of our speakers today? If not, we are approaching the end of our allotted time. So a couple of things that I'd like to do is first of all to thank our speakers. The big virtual claps going on in the background there. What a debate that's been! Absolutely brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I think that it's been really lively and positive and really powerful. And I just think that for everyone on this call, I just think it must have been, it's just been brilliant. And I've learned so much as a person as well. We need to do more now as a bit of a movement. We need to do some stuff in the background here. Sarah Thompson, can you come forward just to introduce Sarah? Sarah's probably one of the best campaigners I've ever met in her life, and she's got today set up. She's done all the hard work behind the scenes on this. So are you there, Sarah?
I am, yeah. Hi.
Hi, you mate. What do we do next now, mate? There's opportunities here for training, for briefing, to sign a pledge, to get policy in place. We need to follow this up, don't we?
Yeah, we do. I think there's a lot more conversation and a lot more support to be done. I came at this from a personal angle, having struggled for the last 2 to 3 years, thinking I was going mad, being told I needed antidepressants, being told that I was fat because it was a middle-age spread, getting all sorts of symptoms that I thought I was had serious illness. It turns out that almost 100% of them were the menopause. And eventually finding a female GP who was brilliant. And I went armed with my stats from the Balance app. I sat in on webinars and I did my research and I went in, and she actually turned around and said, "You want HRT? You have HRT." So I didn't need to fight for it. I'm patched up and pilled up, and 4 months in, I feel like a new woman. I wish I felt 30 again, but unfortunately that's never going to happen. But, you know, the guidance and the help is out there. But personally, again, I'd seen my own mom struggle 30 odd years ago at the age of 51, having to give up a very high profile HR director's role with a big supermarket, one of the top 5 supermarkets, because she couldn't cope. She was struggling with ill health. And I'd seen her deteriorate for many months, and she went back to work. She worked another 20 years until she was over 70 in a part-time role. So she'd got an awful lot more to give, but just felt that full-time role and the support wasn't there. But 30 years ago, it's very different. As far as we're concerned with Women in Leadership, which I set up in 2019, we've looked at some of the issues, and I felt so strongly about this and felt that the Business Festival was an ideal platform to put this out there. And I just want to say thank you to the speakers for being involved. We've had some brilliant conversation, and we've had some real insight from some real experts in all the different fields. So thank you so much. And thank you to Nina. I think we tapped into a webinar a few weeks ago and we connected afterwards, which was more of a legal perspective, but I needed to get my head around that, not coming from a legal background. But as far as Women in Leadership is concerned, we are planning at least 3 more events between now and March. And I think from what's come out of today, we need to probably look at health and well-being in the workplace and focus a little bit more on this. Maybe look at one of those to sign this pledge and to make sure that menopause in the workplace is out there and we're all shouting about it, because it's something that we all go through. We all tend to be over a certain age when we're going through it. And as many of you have said before, we have an awful lot more to do. We're juggling houses, children, absolutely everything. And we want to work full time. We've got an awful lot to give. And unfortunately, health-wise, it can be quite debilitating. So we just need to raise a profile of that and shout about it.
Amazing. Thank you very, very much, Sarah. Thank you to all of our speakers for giving up your time today. It's really, really important discussion. Thanks to everyone for joining us. We will make this link available afterwards, because it's been a bloody brilliant debate. And we will follow this up with some more training opportunities and charities to chat. So thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.